If we lose this negotiation, Elias whispered, leaning so close I could smell the stale mint on his breath, you will be back translating technical manuals for minimum wage. I did not look at him. I did not flinch. I just kept my eyes locked on Mr. Tanaka across the table, the chief operating officer of Vanguard Logistics, who was calmly arranging his documents like they held the fate of the world. Because in a way they did. 12 men in tailored Navy suits sat along the lacquered conference table in our Tokyo office, and none of them had blinked since Elias barged in 20 minutes late, reeking of corporate arrogance and desperation. The man thought charm was just speaking louder than everyone else, and that international negotiations could be bulldozed with aggressive metaphors. He introduced himself with a loud joke about taking this merger to the stratosphere. Mr. Tanaka had not even acknowledged him. I am David, 48 years old, and I have spent the last 6 years building this deal from the ground up. I spoke again, crisp and precise Japanese, flowing from my lips like a well-oiled machine. I explained the importance of maintaining local operational autonomy, ensuring that Vanguard's integration would be seamless and respectful of their existing corporate culture. That clause would remain untouched. Mr. Tanaka nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his chin. His colleagues exchanged quiet glances. The stakes were tectonic. A long-term logistics and infrastructure integration deal worth $90 million over 4 years. If it fell through, our company's entire Asian expansion strategy would collapse overnight. I had been living and breathing this contract for 14 months. Vanguard trusted me because I listened, because I understood the nuance. I knew that in Japanese business culture, silence was not weakness. It was a deliberate strategy. I knew to bow slightly deeper than I had to, and to let pauses stretch until the other party filled them. And more than anything, I knew how to shut up when it counted. Elias, however, did not. "Let us circle back on that autonomy point," he blurted, switching back to English and waving his hand dismissively. "I think we are giving away too much here. We have the leverage." A rustle of fabric echoed in the room as one of the Vanguard attorneys adjusted his glasses. Mr. Tanaka's slight smile flickered and died instantly. I kept my voice perfectly level. "As we discussed previously," I began, but Elias cut me off. "I was not at the previous meeting," Elias said loudly. "So, let us reframe it. Like this was some startup pitch in a garage and not a cultural minefield where one false syllable could cost the company nearly $100 million. I inhaled through my nose, slow and silent. I could smell the polished mahogany of the table and the faint scent of green tea that had gone cold. It all reeked of a corporate theater where Elias was desperately trying to play the lead role. I turned back to the Vanguard team and said in fluent Japanese, "Please allow me to briefly explain the context of his remarks." A few of the Vanguard executives relaxed visibly. Let them see who is actually fluent and who is merely flailing, I thought, but Elias would not stop. He leaned over to me, his voice dripping with patronizing glee. "Listen, David, you have been doing great as the cultural liaison or whatever. But this is strategy, and that is my lane now." My pen cracked in my hand. I had not even realized I had been gripping it that tightly. I had seen men like Elias my entire career. They always underestimated me until the contract was signed, the ink dried, and the press release went out. But today felt different. There was a charge in the air, a tension that felt like a wire about to snap. Mr. Tanaka cleared his throat, dragging the room's attention back to the center. "We were under the impression," he said in slow, deliberate English, "that David was the lead on this engagement." "He was," Elias said, cutting in smoothly. "But as of this quarter, we are making some strategic leadership changes. You still have full access to our executive team." By executive team, he meant himself. He meant I was replaceable, a tool to be discarded once the heavy lifting was done. I did not respond. I stared at the etched glass wall behind the Vanguard delegation. Outside, the Tokyo skyline stretched endlessly, a sea of glass and steel under a gray sky. Below, the city roared with its usual controlled chaos. Inside, the silence curdled. Elias adjusted his jacket, shooting me a smug look. "Shall we proceed?" he asked, clearly expecting me to translate his demand. I did not. Instead, I looked straight at Mr. Tanaka and said in perfect, unhurried Japanese, "It is clear the leadership structure has changed on our end. Perhaps we should take a short recess to recalibrate expectations." Mr. Tanaka gave the faintest nod. "That would be wise," he murmured. As the Vanguard team rose, Elias beamed like he had just conquered the room. I stood slowly, gathering my folder, my jaw tight. I had not told anyone, not legal, not my colleagues, but I had already started drawing up exit plans 5 weeks ago. A whisper from a contact, an exploratory call. But now, after this absolute farce, after being reduced to a mere translator, while this overconfident fool hijacked my life's work, I knew exactly what I had to do. The moment it happened was so absurd, so perfectly idiotic, I actually thought I had misheard him. Elias stood up mid-sentence, his chair squealing back against the polished floor like it was trying to escape the room. We were 20 minutes into the resumed meeting after the recess, just beginning to review the amended integration clause, the very one I had personally drafted after 8 weeks of back-channel talks with Vanguard's legal team, and then he said it. "David will not be continuing with us," he announced loud and clear, as if reading a mundane weather update. "Effective immediately, we are undergoing a strategic restructuring, and his position has been sunset." Sunset. Not terminated, not laid off. Sunset, like I was an outdated piece of software being phased out for a newer model. The room stilled completely. Mr. Tanaka froze mid-pour, the ceramic teapot hovering over his cup like it was caught in a photograph. One of his deputies blinked several times fast, trying to process the translation of what had just come out of Elias's mouth. I did not move. My ears rang slightly, but my face remained a mask of absolute calm. Not because I was in shock, but because my brain had immediately gone ice cold. There was no panic, only a sharp, calculating clarity. He had not even looked at me when he said it. He just stared across the table, talking through me like I had already been erased from existence. "Elias," I said, my voice perfectly even, "step outside with me." He gave a smug chuckle, waving a hand. "No need, David. This is company business, and I figured transparency was better. No secrets, right?" I saw it then, the little twitch of triumph in his jaw. He had planned this. He had waited until the highest stakes negotiation of the entire year was underway, with all eyes on the table, to pull this stunt. It was a calculated move to publicly humiliate me, assert his dominance, and cement his control over the $90 million deal. I was the chess piece he was sacrificing for spectacle. My chair scraped back slowly as I rose. I was not in a rush. My body moved on instinct, every gesture tight with a fury I absolutely refused to show. "I see," I said, turning to the Vanguard delegation. "Apologies for the disruption. This was unexpected." I slipped back into Japanese before Elias could interject. "Please forgive this sudden development. I understand this may be highly concerning to your organization." Mr. Tanaka did not reply immediately, but he watched me intently. There was no confusion in his eyes, no pity, only deep interest. I caught that flicker of realization behind his gaze, like he was watching a metamorphosis rather than a corporate execution. Elias cleared his throat loudly. "Let us stay on track," he said, clapping his hands together. "We have a proposal on the table." No one moved. Mr. Tanaka raised one hand slowly like a conductor calling for absolute silence. Then he spoke to me, ignoring Elias entirely. "May I ask," he said in Japanese, his tone light but laced with precision, "what your next role will be?" The entire atmosphere in the room shifted. Elias frowned, his brow furrowing. He did not understand the words, but he understood the shift in power. He knew he was no longer in control of the room. I met Mr. Tanaka's gaze and felt a strange, profound calm settle into my bones. It was the kind of calm you feel after a storm has already taken your roof, when you realize all that is left is what you choose to rebuild. I adjusted my blazer, tilting my chin just slightly. "I have not decided yet," I said in Japanese, my voice low and absolutely certain, "but I am always open to new partnerships." The Vanguard team exchanged swift, silent glances. Elias, still clueless, tried to regain the floor. "Listen, we can handle the translation later. Let us focus on the deal at hand." But the room no longer belonged to him. Mr. Tanaka stood up, slow and deliberate, and addressed his colleagues with a single word. "Break." They rose in perfect unison, leaving their folders untouched on the table. Mr. Tanaka lingered just long enough to glance back at me and offer the barest nod. It was a nod of respect. As they filed out of the room, Elias turned to me, his voice low and dripping with triumph. "You should have seen this coming, David. You were overpaid and overhyped." I looked at him then, not angry, not broken, but with absolute clarity. "You just fired your only translator, your cultural bridge, and the architect of this entire deal," I said softly. And you did it all just to feed your own ego. He snorted derisively. Enjoy job hunting, buddy. I smiled faintly. I already received a lucrative offer 3 weeks ago, Elias. I turned it down at the time. He paused, his smug smile flickering for a fraction of a second. I stepped forward, leaning in just a bit. I think I am going to accept it now. The door had barely clicked shut behind the Vanguard delegation before Elias started talking again. He spoke fast and loud, trying to fill the heavy silence like a man scooping water from a sinking boat with his bare hands. Let us get ahead of this, he said, pacing. I will have legal draft a statement, loop in public relations, maybe frame it as a mutual transition we had been planning for months. David, I will even let you draft the handover emails. You are not in the room anymore, Elias. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to do so. My words landed like a heavy stone on a glass table. He froze. That same nervous twitch in his jaw returned. He had not quite wrapped his mind around the idea that I was not going to yell, beg, or storm out in a blaze of dramatic emails. I just stood there, calm, my hands folded neatly over my leather portfolio. I do not think you get to decide that, he said finally, stepping closer in a weak attempt at intimidation. Oh, but I do, I replied, picking up my portfolio, because in exactly 60 seconds, this room will not belong to your company anymore. Right on cue, the door opened. Mr. Tanaka returned alone. He had no assistants with him, no translators. He looked directly at me, completely ignoring Elias. Then, in flawless Japanese, he said, "Would you be willing to continue our discussion independently? I did not miss a single beat." "I would be honored," I replied in Japanese. There was a tense pause. Mr. Tanaka looked over my shoulder at Elias, whose mouth had just parted to issue a protest. Mr. Tanaka raised one hand, silencing him instantly. "I would appreciate it," he said, switching to slow, formal English, "if your representatives could give us the room." It was not a request. It was a surgical strike wrapped in supreme corporate politeness. Elias hesitated, his face turning a blotchy red. "I am sorry, but we are still the authorized representatives." Mr. Tanaka's eyebrow arched slightly. "The contractual relationship appears undefined at this exact moment," he stated coldly. Elias stepped back, like a man suddenly aware he had wandered onto a frozen lake that was cracking beneath his feet. "Fine," he snapped, grabbing his laptop. "But this is not over." "You are absolutely right," I replied without looking at him. "It is just beginning." Elias lingered at the door for a second, too long, glaring at my back before vanishing into the hallway. Silence returned to the boardroom. Mr. Tanaka sat down across from me. I did not speak right away. I let the air settle. I let the moment breathe and establish the new dynamic. Then I slipped back into Japanese with ease and elegance. "The original proposal still stands," I said, opening my folder and turning a fresh document to face him. With one major change. My title. I pulled out a clean sheet of high-quality paper. It bore no corporate logo, no watermarks. I am now operating as an independent executive consultant. All the technical and logistical terms remain completely intact. However, my compensation structure would shift to a success-based model. 10% payable upon contract execution, and I work directly for Vanguard. I pushed the paper forward with a steady hand. Mr. Tanaka's mouth twitched. It was not quite a smile, but something deeper. It was recognition. "You already had this prepared," he noted, his eyes scanning the crisp text. I allowed myself the softest smirk. "Let us just say I believe in being thoroughly prepared for any strategic restructuring." He nodded once. The man who had spoken perhaps 20 words over the entire week of negotiations suddenly unfolded his arms and leaned in. For the next 2 hours, we talked. We really talked about supply chain integrations, hybrid licensing models, and joint logistics planning. We discussed the cultural philosophy behind Vanguard's decentralized hierarchy and the ways my former employer had been fumbling the trust they had once built by treating the Asian market like a simple expansion rather than a true collaboration. I spoke his language. Not just Japanese, but the language of mutual respect, the unsaid subtext, the strategic pauses. Mr. Tanaka noticed all of it. By the time his deputies returned to the room, I had redlined the contract, noted 4 critical adjustments Vanguard had quietly hoped for, but never dared to request, and suggested a phased rollout schedule that would give them significantly more leverage with their regional partners. Mr. Tanaka stood up and extended his hand. "This," he said in Japanese, "is exactly how true business is meant to be conducted." I shook his hand. I felt no relief, no arrogant pride, just a quiet humming power. Because the moment I crossed that line, stood my ground, and claimed my true value, it was no longer just an act of professional survival. It was a declaration of absolute war against Elias. The morning after the negotiation, my former company released a statement so incredibly generic it could have been copied and pasted from a decades-old template. We thank David for his past contributions and wish him success in his future endeavors. As part of our global restructuring initiative, we remain committed to excellence in our international partnerships. Their version of commitment, apparently, came in the form of a hastily assembled task force of underqualified yes-men and a newly hired interpreter who butchered basic industry terminology. I read the press release on my phone while sipped black coffee in the corner booth of a quiet cafe in Shibuya. I scrolled past the corporate sycophants on social media, already liking Elias's post about leaning into disruption and navigating difficult transitions with bold leadership. I did not comment. I did not react. I just quietly filed the whole thing into a mental folder, labeled as leverage for later. What no one at the company knew, not public relations, not legal, not even Elias himself, was that I was already on my third meeting that day with Vanguard's senior legal team. The contract they signed was not with David as an individual. It was with a newly registered entity that had existed on paper for less than 72 hours. A quiet consulting firm with a post office box, a dedicated encrypted server, and a sleek logo. It was a shell, yes, but it was my shell, and behind it, the real work had already begun in earnest. Vanguard funded my initial retainer without hesitation and began making introductions. A major logistics firm in Kyoto asked me to audit an integration framework. A tech startup in Osaka offered me a lucrative advisory role to help navigate export compliance. I operated like an absolute ghost. I had no public social media presence, no flashy office, just encrypted calls late at night, secure chats with chief executives, and long walks through city parks where no one could overhear my conversations. Every time I passed one of my old company's advertisements in the airport or heard Elias's name mentioned in industry news, I smiled. Not because I missed the corporate grind, but because I was systematically dismantling their empire, brick by brick, deal by deal, client by client. And Elias had absolutely no clue until the first sign of panic arrived in the form of a calendar invite. The subject line read Urgent Vanguard Account Transition, sent at 3 in the morning. At 9 sharp, 7 executives logged into the virtual call, looking exhausted and desperate. Elias joined last, trying to project confidence. "Let us get ahead of this narrative," he ordered. But there was no narrative to control, because Vanguard was simply not returning their calls. Elias had assigned a replacement for me, a manager named Rossi, who spoke decent French but absolutely no Japanese. Rossi sent 5 follow-up emails that went completely ignored. Elias tried calling Mr. Tanaka's office directly. The calls went straight to voicemail. He emailed Vanguard's in-house counsel, only to receive an automated bounce back. Vanguard had simply walked away without slamming the door. Meanwhile, Elias stormed into his human resources department, his tie loose and his face pale. "We need to shut David down right now," he barked. "He is breaching his contract and poaching our clients. That is corporate sabotage." But the compliance officer just scrolled through the system, looking thoroughly confused. "Sir, his termination paperwork is not finalized." "What do you mean?" Elias demanded. "There are no final separation documents on file, no signed non-compete agreement, nothing uploaded to the legal tracker. It is all marked as pending." Elias's face drained of all color. "You are telling me we fired him, but we never actually finished the legal paperwork." "I thought you were handling it personally as a strategic leadership decision," the officer replied defensively. By 6 in the evening, the legal department confirmed the disaster. I had no enforceable non-compete. Nothing prevented me from advising former clients. And the best part was that I knew it all along. But Elias was not going to give up that easily. He pushed his legal team to draft a retroactive agreement, trying to claim I had verbally agreed to a non-compete before my departure. He even submitted a document to the board bearing what looked suspiciously like my signature, dated the day of the Tokyo meeting. That was his fatal mistake. He had crossed the line from corporate incompetence directly into criminal territory. Under California Penal Code Section 470, Forging a signature on a legally binding corporate document is a serious felony. It renders the entire contract void ab initio, meaning it is legally dead from the exact moment of its creation. When my contact inside the company sent me a secure message about the forged document, I did not panic. I simply forwarded the evidence to a high-powered corporate defense attorney named Vance, along with a complete time-stamped log of my actual whereabouts and digital signatures from that day. "They are digging their own grave," Vance told me over an encrypted line. "Let them keep digging," I replied. The collapse did not happen with a loud explosion. It happened with a quiet, devastating whisper. It started with a brief article in an international business journal. Vanguard Logistics has officially entered into an exclusive strategic partnership with a boutique consultancy, severing its previous ties due to severe mismanagement and compliance failures by their former vendor. There was no explicit mention of my name, but industry insiders knew exactly what it meant. They knew when my firm's encrypted servers began handling data that used to flow through Elias's department. They knew when Vanguard's procurement team issued a blanket cancellation of all pending software licenses with my former company. By noon the next day, the company's stock had dipped 7%. It was a sharp enough drop to catch the eye of institutional investors who were trained to smell blood in the water. Inside the corporate headquarters, panic bloomed like a toxic gas leak. Elias paced outside the glass walls of the boardroom, shouting into his phone, demanding that legal issue a cease and desist order against me. But the legal department was paralyzed. They had received a formal notice from Vance, my attorney, outlining the undeniable evidence of the forged non-compete agreement. The notice explicitly cited California Penal Code Section 470, detailing the criminal liability of submitting a fabricated signature to the board of directors. It made it crystal clear that any attempt to enforce the void ab initio document would result in immediate civil litigation and criminal referrals. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was a private number. I answered it to find a senior board member on the line. He sounded exhausted. "David," he said quietly, "we have reviewed the documents your attorney sent over. The board is initiating a full internal investigation into Elias's conduct. We would like to offer you a highly generous settlement to keep this out of the public eye." I looked out the window of my new office in Tokyo, watching the city lights flicker to life against the twilight sky. "I am not looking for a quick payout," I told him calmly. "I am looking for accountability. I will not sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the forgery." The silence on the other end was heavy. The board knew they were trapped. 2 days later, a major financial news outlet published a massive 10,000-word expose on the implosion of the Asian expansion strategy. The article detailed the toxic culture, the reckless firing in the middle of the Vanguard negotiation, and the shocking revelation of the forged legal documents orchestrated by senior leadership. The fallout was instantaneous and absolute. Elias was placed on immediate administrative leave, escorted out of the building by security, his career completely incinerated in the span of 48 hours. The company's stock plummeted 20% by the end of the trading week. They lost 3 more major accounts as clients scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a state-of-the-art conference room, finalizing the largest logistics integration deal in Vanguard's history. Mr. Tanaka smiled warmly across the table. "We are very pleased to have you leading this project directly, David," he said in Japanese. "The terms of the $90 million deal were finalized, with my firm retaining full strategic control and a solid 10% success fee. There were no middlemen, no arrogant executives, no toxic politics. Just pure, unadulterated business built on genuine trust and absolute competence." I signed the final page of the contract, my real signature flowing smoothly across the paper. I felt a profound sense of closure. I had not just survived a brutal corporate betrayal. I had used the law, my cultural expertise, and my unyielding patience to completely dismantle the man who tried to destroy me. As I walked out of the Vanguard building and into the bustling streets of Tokyo, I breathed in the cool evening air. I was a 48-year-old independent consultant who had just secured his future on his own terms. True power, I realized, was never about who shouted the loudest in the boardroom. It was about knowing exactly when to stay silent and exactly when to strike.